Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 16th of October 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. And joining me in the studio today is Vanessa Beeley from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Vanessa.
Thank you, Mike. I'm very glad you got my name right on the bottom half.
Yes, I did. Anyway, we're going to get straight on with Brexit. And the BBC telling us that today Theresa May is to dine with EU chiefs amid Brexit deadlock. So the fake news from the BBC is that Brexit is in deadlock. She's in Brussels, apparently, for a dinner with EU leaders, including Michel Barnier, who, of course, is the chief negotiator for the European Commission, and European Commission Chief Jean-Claude Juncker. And this is coming, as the BBC claims, after talks are in deadlock. David Davis is also going to be there, amongst others. Now, Boris Johnson was joined yesterday, I believe it was, by foreign ministers from Bulgaria, Croatia, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, in Chevening House to discuss the shared challenges of Brexit, but also the UK's continued commitment to European security, because this is what's really going on. We've been talking about this for so long now, and every day there's more information comes out on it. Boris Johnson said our departure from the European Union will make no difference to Britain's unconditional and immovable commitment to the security and defence of Europe. Well, the government said this meeting is a further demonstration that the UK is a vital partner in the security of our continent. So that's the government's position. So what is this all about? Well, of course, the BBC does not mention this. Here it is. Jump-starting a new era in defence. Now, this document was published by the European Commission 2015. This is Jump-starting a new era in defence. It's published, it's an EPSC strategic note. These are analytical papers, they say, on topics chosen by the President of the European Commission. So that's Jean-Claude Juncker, that Theresa May is meeting today. They're produced by the European Political Strategy Centre. And this is the European Commission's in-house think tank. And this particular strategic note that I have on screen at the moment has been conceived in cooperation with Michel Barnier, who was at that time Special Advisor on European Defence and Security Policy to President Jean-Claude Juncker. So the two people that are involved in the production of this document are the two people that Theresa May is meeting today. And what does it say in this document? Well, here is a quote. Europe needs to move from the current patchwork of bilateral and multilateral military cooperation to gradually increase defence integration. The permanent structured cooperation (PESCO) provided in the Lisbon Treaty could become a game changer in European security by enabling willing member states to move forward. This is extremely important. As I say, was it mentioned by the BBC? Absolutely not. PESCO. Now, that's the quote from this. Now let's look at this document, this article here. This is from the European Union External Action website. Permanent Structured Cooperation, PESCO, on defence could be launched by the end of 2017. And what it says is that a broad consensus by all EU member states on the modalities for launching permanent structured cooperation in the field of defence could lead to a legal decision as early as December, with some 30 projects for concrete cooperation between countries already on the table. European Union Ministers of Defence meeting formally in Tallinn on the 7th of September, just a few weeks ago, under the aegis of Estonian presidency, were in broad agreement on how to move ahead with permanent structured cooperation on defence, paving the way for legal decision launching PESCO possibly by the end of the year. And I'll just remind everybody that at that meeting was our Defence Secretary Michael Fallon. He absolutely was in agreement with this. And who was there but none other than Federica Mogherini. And she said today, that was on the 8th of September, we have registered a broad consensus on the main lines of permanent structured cooperation. She said that by now and the end of September, ministers would consolidate this list of commitments with the aim to be ready by mid-October to present to the EU High Representative and the Council the basis for a common notification of interest on member states to participate in a permanent structure of cooperation in the field of defence. In accordance to our treaties, following this notification, we would adopt a formal legal decision that can be negotiated then within the following 3 months. And based on this timeline, PESCO could be launched by the EU by the end of December. That's what Federica Mogherini said. So do we have any evidence that PESCO is on the agenda for this European meeting this week? Well, we do indeed, because here's the Prague Daily Monitor. You can't go to the Western media for this because they're not covering it. Czech government to join PESCO defence project. BBC not mentioning anything about a PESCO defence project. This is what it says. The Czech government has approved the Czech Republic joining the preparations for the Permanent Structured Cooperation. State Secretary for European Affairs, Alois Chmylar, told journalists on Wednesday. The government also gave a mandate to the Prime Minister for the next EU summit scheduled for Brexit at the end of the last week of October. That's the end of this week. The PESCO that is to help create specific projects within joint European defence will be officially started in December, he added. So more confirmation that this is going to be done within the next couple of months. The EU summit, which is being held Thursday and Friday, EU leaders will discuss migration, digital Europe, defence and security, as well as external relations. And they're going to be discussing the Iran thing, which of course is high on the priority agenda because Donald Trump has, by coincidence, decided to come out against it over the last few days. So what else is going on? Well, here we have Jane's. Jane's, of course, is the big defence publication, and the headline here is EU-NATO officials propose military Schengen. And this is from a couple of days ago. The notion of a so-called military Schengen, where troops and material could move more easily within Europe, is among the main ideas proposed for permanent structured cooperation, PESCO, in defence amongst EU countries, according to EU and NATO military sources. And they have a quote: there will need to be a strong political will to implement this concept because it would require changes to national legislation and in some cases national constitutions, but it is among the major PESCO projects now on the table. This is all about defence, and I'm going to read that a little bit again. It may require in some cases changes to national constitutions. This is how significant this is. That national constitutions are going to have to be changed. Of course, we're getting none of this in the mainstream media because all we're getting is that Brexit is in chaos. We're getting internal conflict within the Conservative Party. And all this noise is what's covering up what's going on in the background. This is what EU and NATO we're talking about. And we mentioned that these two were meeting last week. This Federica Mogherini and Jens Stoltenberg meeting last week. So that's what these two were up to last Thursday. That's what this lot were up to last Thursday as well, because there's Michael Fallon, Boris Johnson. If you remember, we were talking about this. They were meeting up with their Polish counterparts. And that's what this is all about tonight. So PESCO, we need to remember that acronym, Permanent Structured Cooperation. This is military union leading to fiscal union, leading to federal union. And just remember, Brexit is driving this, quotes, renaissance in the European Union. That's what Juncker is calling it. That's what Brexit is for. That's why it's being presented in the news as chaotic, as I say. And that's why the government appears to be divided and split to hide this. So the media not covering it, not giving it any coverage, any mention at all. They're hiding it, and that's why they need to be on trial, Vanessa.
They do. They need to be mentioned in the media on trial event on the 19th, this Thursday, at, I can never remember the name.
It's the Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church.
Exactly.
John Pilger will be headlining, Peter Ford will be speaking, Patrick Henningsen, Vanessa Beeley, Piers Robinson, Robert Stewart, Tim Hayward, and details on eventbrite.com. Tickets available on eventbrite.com. Tickets are going fast, I believe. They've had to open extra space in the venue for this. So the chances of getting a ticket on the door may be disappearing. Do get your ticket and do get along to it.
Do come anyway, and because they are opening up the balcony, so we're hoping that we can fit in a good 100 more. So do come along.
So let's not let the media off the hook. This is The Economist, who have run a hit piece on Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping has more clout than Donald Trump. The world should be wary. And this is their latest issue. They say the United States is still the world's most powerful country, but its leader is weaker at home and less effective abroad than any of his recent predecessors, not least because he scorns the values and alliances that underpin American influence The president of the world's largest authoritarian state, by contrast, walks with a swagger abroad. His grip on China is tighter than any since Mao, and they absolutely draw parallels between Xi and Mao. They say he presents himself as an apostle of peace and friendship, a voice of reason in a confused and troubled world. The Trump's failings have never made this have made this much easier. They say that with regarding the Silk Road, hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese money are to be invested abroad in railways, ports, power stations, and other infrastructure that will help vast swathes of the world prosper. But they're concerned that in fact this is just a geopolitical agenda that's being played out, and so on. They say that unlike Vladimir Putin, you'll love this, Vanessa. Unlike Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, Mr. Xi is not a global troublemaker who seeks to subvert democracy and destabilize the West. At home, however, he's a real hard man. Right. He's shutting down the country as hard as he can, and so on. And well, in parallel with this Economist hit piece, over the last few days, we've had on the front page of the BBC News website a similar hit piece, The Thoughts of Chairman Xi. Now, of course, the little red book, Mao's little red book, is often called The Thoughts of Chairman Mao. So this is clearly,
subtle.
Yeah, pretty subtle, isn't it? And this is the type of thing that they're, Xi Jinping is tightening his grip and power. How did one man come to embody Chinese destiny? They give a bit of background to him, but then we get to the real part. It's the control. And I thought, in fact, I nearly, despite the fact I was sitting in a comfortable chair, I nearly fell off it with the next one, because here we go. Apparently in China, every mobile phone is now a potential listening device and censorship tool. Correct me if I'm wrong.
This is an exercise in projection, isn't it?
It's incredible hypocrisy, isn't it?
It's global troublemakers. Hello?
So the media needs to be on trial, and get to that event on Thursday if you can. Now, the day before, in the George in Plimpton at 7:30, it's that time again, is the UK column meeting. This is the third Wednesday of the month coming up, so get along to that if you can as well. Now, let's move on to Syria. Mm-hmm. And, well, good news. Yes. This is Al-Mayadeen, which has now been liberated from ISIS.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a very important town, although it's much smaller than Deir ez-Zor. What it actually does is, I believe it's to the east of Deir ez-Zor. I might get hammered by the geographical experts now. But basically what it's doing is to reinforce the victory in Deir ez-Zor and to prevent the sort of the backlash from ISIS, if you like. It also strengthens its grip on one key city that lies on the line of communication that links Syria to Iraq. So again, very important. But another point to make here, Mike, we're getting very similar reports again that we've heard previously, I think back in June from the Russian military, that the Kurds that have taken over and occupied Raqqa in place of ISIS have actually allowed, and that word was used, allowed ISIS to withdraw towards the east in order to block the Syrian Arab Army unification with Iraq. Also, in the liberation of this town, we're seeing the familiar findings of ISIS weapon caches, particularly in tunnels and underground. And again, the question has to be raised, where are these weapons coming in from? Deir ez-Zor and Mayadeen are in the center of the landmass of Syria. And from there is radiated out the terrorist activities of particularly ISIS. So where is this equipment coming from? Who's supplying it? Who's bringing it?
These are good questions. Do you have any idea?
Well, of course, we have an idea that it might well be the US coalition that has been heavily bombing and targeting this area. Yeah. One always has to ask, when the US coalition or the US on its own carpet bombs an area, what are they trying to hide? I
mean, what we're looking at here is at the death throes of ISIS.
Definitely.
But I mean, while that's good news, so the reports that I've been hearing are suggesting that this has been the heaviest fighting that Syria has seen since the start of the war, in fact.
Definitely.
I heard a clip that you had been sent from somebody
on the front lines in that area.
And in the background was the noise of what was going on. It was worse than anything I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's certainly worse than I've heard, even being in Aleppo during the various battles for liberation and the bombing of the terrorist entities by the Syrian and Russian Air Force. So yes, I think this was a very tough battle. I've been told that there are US, British and French forces on the ground there at the moment, ostensibly supporting the Kurdish forces. But of course now we're reaching that pivotal point where the Syrian Arab Army needs to retake territory from those Kurdish factions. So are we going to see now a head-on collision, whereas previously we've seen scuffles and we've seen indications that the Kurds and ISIS are, if not collaborating, they are using each other as chess pieces on the board that is Syria, to secure territory, to secure oil, to secure a degree of Kurdish settlement in those areas, as we were listening to. I also spoke to somebody from that area yesterday who gave me a lot of background information on the growth of the Kurdish military in that area. So, you know, I think we're going to see now the next stage of the battle, and it all depends. And I think also what I was told yesterday is that the Kurds in Syria, the YPG predominantly, but that do have Peshmerga, PKK members within that who are heavily nationalist biased, they're waiting for the results of what's happening in Iraq. What happens in Iraq to the bid for Kurdistan, or the bid for nationalism there by the Kurdish movements led by Barzani is going to have a very important influence on what the Kurds do in Syria.
And just briefly, because it's related, what about last week the Turkish incursion across the border? How's that going to affect the situation?
Idlib is to some extent a separate situation. You know, Idlib has been overrun by factions that are effectively controlled by Turkey. So while Turkey is claiming that it's working in cooperation with Russia, particularly on this, the Syrian government has put out a very clear statement saying that the Turkish troops should withdraw from Idlib, that they perceive it as an act of aggression against their territorial integrity, and that they have no right to be inside Syria. There are also been video footage put out, particularly on social media, of the Turkish troops entering with, if you like, an escort from HTS, Area al-Sham, which is in fact a rebrand of Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda. So it's a confused situation, but what is not confused is that Turkey has had designs on annexing Idlib for some time, and those designs are not going to be abandoned. So I think again we're seeing endless power play here in the northeast from the Kurdish factions, supported by the United States, of course, and Israel, and then the northwest by Turkey in Idlib. So, you know, it's not over in Syria by a long shot yet, but certainly the ISIS threat is pretty much close to being eradicated.
And the other threat, as time goes on and things start to be resolved, of course, is that there are cells left behind.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that is something that Syria is going to have to deal with for some time to come.
So on screen we have a little shop in Damascus.
Yeah, this was a shop that actually I visited in August, but it's on a street. It's called the Straight Street in the old city of Damascus, and it basically takes you down to the souk. So it's a very busy civilian market residential area, predominantly Christian. Bab Tuma is predominantly, or was predominantly, a Christian area. And today, this area, this shop, was targeted by a terrorist mortar coming in, most likely from Jobar or Ain Tama, to the east of Damascus, although that has not been confirmed yet. But this is just a demonstration that the terrorism that has been injected into Syria is still targeting civilians. It's not targeting the army, it's targeting civilians, it's targeting residential areas, it's targeting hospitals, schools, you know, and this is the freedom that they're bringing to Syria.
Yeah. Okay, and RT also reporting US destroying Syrian cities liberated from ISIS to obstruct pro-Assad forces. Yeah. So
I mean, you know, this is, yeah, of course. I mean, this is a familiar pattern, and we've seen the US coalition bombing Deir ez-Zor just as it was about to be liberated. Now they're bombing, or they have been bombing, Raqqa. And recent drone footage of Raqqa has actually demonstrated to what extent they've reduced it to what is effectively a moonscape. It's extraordinary. But of course, this has multiple ramifications. One, it potentially impedes the Syrian Arab army advances because it creates a humanitarian crisis that they have to deal with before being able to move on. But they're also destroying entire cities, as with Mosul in Iraq, Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor. And cynically speaking, we can also say that this ensures that even post-military intervention, there will be a need for rebuilding and reconstruction in Syria. And of course, then you have the profiteering private sector vultures hovering around, waiting to come in and to recoup some of the losses from a failed war in Syria.
And this is why they still need regime change, because of course Assad isn't going to allow Western companies in.
He's going to be very cautious about it, yes. And you know, the main rebuilding projects that are actually now starting, for example, in Aleppo, have been given to China, to Iran, to Russia, to the allies that have stood by Syria throughout the 7 years of this illegal proxy war that has been waged against them.
Yeah. Okay, now a big issue with regard to Syria has been chemical weapons, and the permanent mission of the Russian Federation to the United Nations on Friday, it looks like, has released this briefing paper, Syrian Chemical Dossier, The Russian View, by Ambassador Mikhail Ulyanov, head of the Russian delegation to UNGA First Committee. So what's he saying?
Well, I mean, I think I urge everybody to go and read this, because I think it's one of the most level-headed, rational examinations of both the evidence and the methodology behind the gathering of evidence by the organisations that were set up to do so. Obviously, just to clarify, they also go over the history of the chemical weapon attacks, including the Khan al-Assal attacks that were ignored by corporate media and by the UN in March 2013, when chemical weapons were used against the Syrian army and civilians by various extremist factions inside Syria. Those attacks have actually, as far as I am aware, not ever been properly investigated, and no conclusions have been drawn from it. But basically what happened was that the UN set up the fact-finding mission, so the FFM, but the FFM is not mandated to determine the guilty party. They are only mandated to gather the evidence and to provide the analysis to the UN OPCW, the Joint Investigative Mission, to fill the gap of not being able to determine the guilty party. Now, when we look at the backers of the OPCW, of course, and this has been mentioned in the report, is that the majority of those who are conducting the investigation are from Western nations only, although the mandate originally was that they should come from as wide a spread of global representatives as possible to obviously ensure objectivity. But in fact, the majority are from Western states. Now, also, this mission was kept secret. Russia actually discovered who the members were of this mission in April of this year, and they determined that they were from Western states, dominated actually by the UK, who has a clear declared interest in regime change inside Syria, so hardly an impartial, objective participant in this investigation. And then, of course, we have the fact, what he does is he highlights 4 points in this report. First of all, and this has to be emphasized, the UN Secretariat Department of Security managed to obtain guarantees of safe access to the site of events, so Khan Shaykhun, the April 4th chemical attack, from the field commanders who control the area of Khan Shaykhun. So, Mike, this is very interesting. This actually means that the UN Secretariat Department has been able to obtain permission from the commanders of Nusra Front, of Al-Qaeda, inside Khan Shaykhun. However, the FFM, which is the fact-finding mission, didn't show readiness to use this opportunity, having preferred to conduct the investigation on the territory of a country neighbouring Syria, i.e. Turkey, so remote investigation. By declining to visit Khan Shaykhun, the OPCW failed to secure integrity of evidence. Samples were gathered by compromised organisations like, guess who, the White Helmets, and delivered to Turkey, which again is also compromised as a country, as a nation, having incubated the terrorism which has flooded into Syria. The Syrian government, at risk to its own supporters, did obtain samples from Khan Shaykhun that confirmed traces of sarin. So actually the only honest broker in this has been the Syrian government that has been to Khan Shaykhun, collected samples that do actually show traces of sarin. The report also contains no information on how sarin was used. This is pivotal to an honest conclusion in the investigation. And following allegations of sarin storage at the Sharat air base that led, of course, to its targeting by President Trump with the Tomahawk missiles shortly after the alleged chemical weapon attack in Khan Shaykhun, why did the fact-finding mission not respond to invitations from the Syrian government and assurances of their safety to visit the site to determine the presence of chemical weapons? So, in other words, the FFM has failed in its own mandate to provide analysis and data to the JIM in order to determine the protagonists in the chemical weapons attack. But it's also, the JIM is also failing to instruct the OPCW to collect those samples from Sharat Air Base. So, you know, there's a whole, what appears to be a tremendous amount of obfuscation and hiding of information or refusing to actually address the investigation in a professional manner. And of course, he raises the final question, which we must all raise in any of these alleged incidents: who benefits from this attack? And what he makes very clear is that on absolutely no basis did President Assad or the Syrian Arab Army or their Russian or Iranian allies stand to benefit from a chemical attack against Idlib at this point in the proceedings.
They made this quote: "As soon as another chemical incident happens in Syria, we hear powerful international clamour accusing Damascus of committing the crime, even before the investigation has started." And exactly. That sums it up.
Yeah, it's trial and judgment by media, generally speaking, because the media, you know, ran with that entire accusation well before an investigation had even been put in place.
Okay, now we mentioned the Kurds already with respect to Syria, but the situation in Iraq continues to move on, and Sami Ramadani, tweeting this out: Iraqi Kurdistan representative in London delighted with warmongers Levy and BH Levy and Tory MP Julian Lewis to aid Israeli push for fragmenting peoples of Middle East.
Well, I mean, that sort of says it all, really, isn't it? I mean, Levy, who is the arch sovereign nation breaker-upper, demolition expert, who actually on October the 4th was also in New York City celebrating a Peshmerga film event. And in his tweet, in his own tweet, he actually stated that the Jews and Kurds, more than an alliance, they are a brotherhood. So the Israeli support of the Kurdish movement for separatism also speaks volumes.
Allied news here, the headline is Iraqi military advances in Kirkuk, captures key positions from Kurdish forces. So this is following the referendum?
Yeah, this is following the referendum, and of course the referendum was not deemed constitutional by the government in Baghdad. So what we're now seeing is moves by Baghdad to retake several key Kurdish Peshmerga controlled positions near Kirkuk, because of course Kirkuk is also, or that entire area that has been largely occupied, and we also have to go back to the Iraq War and understand that it was the US that sort of ensured the settlement of the Kurdish factions in that area that contain much of the oil and gas reserves. Yeah. So this is a manufactured situation to create, I believe, greater discord and sectarian war within Iraq itself. It's a mixed, we're getting mixed reports at the moment. Some are saying that the Peshmerga troops are basically giving up their positions. Others are saying that there has been sporadic gunfire. But certainly from Baghdad's point of view, from Iraq's point of view, it's non-constitutional to divide their country up along these lines. And again, it has a very important influence on what happens in Syria and Iran and Turkey.
Right. And in the meantime, of course, the war continues in Yemen. And what now? We have a referendum in Yemen as well.
Yeah, isn't that coincidental? Shortly after, and obviously following on the heels of all these various succession movements, particularly in Catalonia, in Iraq, in Syria to some extent, we're now seeing a succession movement led by various factions, southern separatist movement factions in Aden. Now, this is not unusual. Yemen was previously divided into two, north and south. The Saudi project was to effectively divide it into six sectarian states, with its arch enemy Ansarullah marooned in the center, with very landlocked, basically, with no access to sea or to borders. But what we're seeing now, and what is interesting, and we mentioned it on Sunday Wire last night, is that one of the people that I speak to regularly in Yemen described the triad as the US being the chairman, the UK being the CEO, and the UAE being the treasurer of this operation in Yemen. And of course, this succession move has come shortly after the reports of British officials being in Aden, talking about securing a military or naval base of some description there again.
Okay, well, look, let's move on to Somalia, and the death toll in the bombing that took place over the weekend has now gone above 300, according to many reports. And the bomb, of course, went off in Mogadishu. Apparently, it was a double bombing, and as I say, the death toll has steadily risen since Saturday. 300 people died in the blast, according to the director of the city's ambulance service. The death toll will be higher because some people are still missing. A doctor at the Medina hospital said that they had recorded 258 deaths, but that number is increasing all the time. He also said that 160 of the bodies could not be recognized, so that was the level of devastation. And of course, what many media outlets don't mention in these situations is the number of injured, most of whom, many if not most of whom, will have what are colloquially termed life-changing injuries as a result of this, limbs blown off and so on. You know, I've just got to ask, who's responsible for it? Well, I've got the wrong quote on this, but she's responsible for it, in my opinion, Priti Patel, International Development Secretary, and he's responsible for it, Boris Johnson, because these two are handing out money like sweets to ISIS and other terrorist organizations, including those, well, of course, ISIS is part of the picture in Somalia as well. But look, if you want some evidence of this, you need to have a look at this article that was in the Daily Mail in December 2016, revealed how Britain pours £568 million of your money into war-torn Somalia, despite a certain risk it will be stolen by ISIS and used to fund terrorism.
And we're seeing exactly the same in Syria right now. I mean, this is an ongoing issue.
Absolutely, but what this article, and the reason that I'm promoting the Daily Mail here, which I don't like to do, the reason I am is because they received a leaked document from the Department for International Development, which included a risk register, which rated the possibility of taxpayer funds being misused or diverted by listed terror groups or criminal gangs as certain and likely to grow in the next 6 to 12 months. It accepts that there's a similar certain risk rating, that consultants will be unable to travel to insecure areas to monitor spending. The Department for International Development accepted that there is a risk that its, quotes, program delivery will be associated with unintended negative consequences. I absolutely would dispute that the consequences here are either misunderstood, not understood at all, or unintended. They're absolutely intended, absolutely intended. Okay, so, you know, 300 more deaths, and our government is largely to blame for that, in my opinion. Now,
while, of course, they are tweeting out their condolences on Twitter.
The hypocrisy is just rank.
Hypocrisy.
Yes. Good news. We're going to end on some good news. Boris Johnson is going to Moscow at the end of the year, and I'm personally writing to Sergei Lavrov to ask if perhaps he could be sent over to Siberia or something and kept there and not returned.
Not brought back.
Not brought back. So he's visiting Moscow towards the end of the year, following an invitation from Foreign Minister Lavrov. And this comes apparently as part of the UK's sustained robust engagement with the Russian government.
Well, robust is correct.
Yeah. So Boris, apparently the press release says that Boris and Sergei last met at the UN General Assembly in September, but it says that now is an important time for both countries to be talking about international security. As permanent members of the Security Council, shared concerns include reducing the risk from North Korea's nuclear missiles program. The visit will be an important opportunity to cover the Iran nuclear deal. And Boris Johnson said that Russia is a fellow permanent member of the UN Security Council and there are global security issues we need to discuss from Iran to North Korea. Of course, we'll continue to challenge Russia's approach where we disagree, whether that is Russia's actions in Syria or its aggression towards Ukraine. My visit will provide an opportunity to talk about these issues and more face to face. Our relationship with Russia is not straightforward, he said. That is all the more reason to be talking to Russia to manage our differences and cooperate where possible. Look, Mr. Lavrov, please don't send him back. You know, we hear these rumours that people disappear in these countries. Let's make it happen for once. And look, let's leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me, Vanessa.
You're welcome.
And we'll be back as usual at 1 o'clock tomorrow. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.